My name is Jennifer Aniston, and I have endured 33 years living inside a deeply patriarchal family structure. To truly understand the betrayal I experienced, you first need to understand the man who built our family dynamic. My father, Richard, constructed his entire life around one unshakable and toxic belief. He believed that sons are the only ones who carry the family legacy forward, while daughters are merely expected to marry well and disappear into the background. He was not overtly violent about it, but his emotional cruelty was constantly present. He allocated his love and his financial support entirely to my older brother, Brad. When Brad graduated, our father eagerly paid for his expensive business degree and connected him with every elite real estate developer in the city. However, when I expressed my dream to attend nursing school, my father bluntly told me that girls do not need expensive educations because they will just get married anyway. I had to earn scholarships and work double shifts at a local diner to pay my own way through my medical training. This blatant favoritism reached its absolute breaking point following a sudden and devastating tragedy. 3 weeks ago, my parents were killed instantly, in a horrific car crash on the interstate. The shock of losing them both at the same time was paralyzing. Yet, the true nightmare began just days after we buried them. We were still standing inside the church vestibule, the funeral flowers still fresh, when Brad pulled me aside. I was still wearing my black mourning dress, my eyes red from crying, expecting my brother to offer some form of comfort. Instead, he looked me dead in the eye and delivered a sentence that shattered my world. He told me that our father made it clear years ago that sons inherit absolutely everything, and daughters get nothing. He informed me that I had exactly 1 week to pack up my entire life and vacate our family home. The cruelty of his words was staggering, especially considering the history of that house. That was the home where I had just spent 2 grueling years caring for our dying mother, Mary, when she battled severe breast cancer. I had moved back in, requested exhausting night shifts at the hospital, and took a massive pay cut just so I could hold her hand through every single chemotherapy session. During those 2 years of agony, Brad visited our mother exactly 3 times. Each visit lasted less than 1 hour. He would sweep into the room wearing his expensive designer suits, impatiently check his gold watch, and leave as quickly as possible. Despite my profound sacrifices, Brad dismissed my caregiving as simply playing nurse. He callously stripped me of my home and told me I was nothing but a burden, completely blind to the spectacular legal storm our mother had secretly prepared for him. To fully comprehend the sheer cruelty of Brad throwing me out onto the street, you must look at the stark contrast in how we each treated our mother during her grueling battle with stage 3 breast cancer. The injustice was not just about losing a childhood home. It was about the complete erasure of my thankless sacrifice. When my mother, Mary, was diagnosed 2 years prior, my father did not politely ask for my help. He called me while I was halfway through a shift at a senior living facility and demanded that I come home. He did not say that we needed to work together as a family. He spoke to me as if it was simply my expected job, just like it had always been my job to serve. I did not hesitate for a single second. I moved back into my childhood bedroom within the week. I went to my supervisor and deliberately requested to be moved to the difficult night shifts so I could be completely awake and available to care for my mother during the day. I became her primary caregiver, managing every single complicated chemotherapy appointment and holding her hand through the agonizing radiation sessions as the cancer slowly deteriorated her health. Because my working hours were reduced, I willingly accepted a 20% pay cut without a second thought. My paycheck shrank significantly, but I did not care because she was my mother and she needed me. Despite my profound daily sacrifices, my father never once acknowledged my efforts. He never thanked me for giving up my life. In his deeply patriarchal mind, my grueling caregiving was simply the uncompensated duty of a daughter. In stark contrast, my brother Brad was living a life of absolute luxury in a sprawling 5-bedroom mansion in Greenwich with his socialite wife, Angelina. They lived in a neighborhood where the mailboxes probably cost more than my entire car. While I was watching our mother slowly lose her vitality, Brad could barely spare a single moment for the woman who raised him. Over the course of 2 excruciating years, Brad visited his dying mother exactly 3 times. Each of those rare visits lasted less than 1 hour. He would sweep into the room wearing his expensive designer suits, kiss her quickly on the forehead, impatiently check his heavy gold Rolex watch, and complain about the traffic before leaving as quickly as possible. Angelina came with him only once. Instead of comforting my mother, Angelina spent the entire time wandering through the rooms, photographing the house for memories, and barely even looking at the woman who was fighting for her life. Later, during our last Thanksgiving together, I overheard them whispering in the hallway. Brad confidently assured Angelina that our father had already promised everything to him. He cruelly dismissed my presence, stating that I was only there to play nurse until our mother passed away, and then I could disappear back into my sad little life. They saw me as nothing more than background noise, completely unaware that our mother saw exactly who they were. That was Monday, the day of the funeral, when Brad had magnanimously promised me 1 week to pack up my entire life. He did not even wait that long. Wednesday evening, exactly 2 days after we buried our parents, I drove up to the house at 7 o'clock. I was completely exhausted from a grueling nursing shift, suffering from the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that makes you feel like you are moving through water. I walked up the front steps and slid my key into the front door lock, but it did not turn. I tried it again, thinking the cold weather had warped the metal, but it was completely useless. Brad had already brought in a locksmith and completely changed the deadbolts. He had effectively locked me out of the very home where I had grown up, the same home where I had just spent 2 years caring for our mother. Panic and confusion setting in, I walked around the side of the house toward the garage. That is when I was met with a devastating sight. Everything I owned had been thrown into cheap cardboard moving boxes and stacked against the wall. The rain from the afternoon had already soaked right through the cardboard. I ran over, frantically opening the wet boxes. My nursing school diploma, the one I had worked so hard to earn, was warped and utterly ruined by the water. Even worse, my mother's cherished recipe box had been carelessly tossed out into the storm. I stood there freezing in the downpour, the water soaking my clothes, and looked through the large window into the living room. It was warm and brightly lit inside. I could see Angelina walking across the room with a glass of wine in her hand, laughing at something on her phone. Then, she looked up and saw me standing outside in the freezing rain. She did not look ashamed or apologetic. Instead, a cruel smile spread across her face. She deliberately raised her wine glass in a mocking little toast to my misery, and then simply walked away. My legs gave out. I sank down into the wet grass right next to the ruined boxes of my belongings. I reached into my pocket to find the only thing that had survived the eviction: my mother's old, cracked Timex watch, which I had kept safely tucked away. I clutched it like a lifeline in the dark, desperate to find anything else of hers that they might have discarded. I pulled open a box filled with items Brad must have assumed were just junk. Inside, underneath a pair of worn gardening gloves and some loose photographs, I saw a sealed, cream-colored envelope. My breath caught in my throat. Written across the front in my mother's distinct handwriting was my name. It was the shaky, trembling script from her final months of chemotherapy. It was a secret letter, hidden in the trash, that was about to expose a lifetime of hidden truths and change my destiny forever. I did not open the letter right there on the wet grass. I waited until I was safe and dry at the apartment of a friend before I carefully broke the seal. Inside the envelope, Mary had written a message that finally made sense of her quiet suffering. She told me she had always seen exactly who Richard and Brad truly were. She knew she could not change the deeply ingrained patriarchal worldview of my father, but she promised me she had found a way to protect me. At the bottom of the page, she instructed me to contact a high-profile attorney named Olivia. The very next morning, I drove into the city and walked into a pristine corner office lined with heavy law books. Olivia was an elegant woman who looked at me with immense warmth and told me she had been waiting for my call. Sitting in that quiet room, I discovered that Mary was far more observant and brilliantly strategic than anyone in our family had ever realized. Olivia revealed that she and Mary had been working together in absolute secrecy for 8 long years. Hearing that time frame made my heart drop. 8 years ago was exactly when I first got accepted into nursing school, the exact same time Richard had coldly dismissed my achievements to loudly praise Brad. Mary had recognized the blatant favoritism of my father and knew with absolute certainty that Brad would inherit the entirety of the estate. She knew I would be left with absolutely nothing if she did not take drastic action. Since she could not alter his mindset, she decided to meticulously plan around it. Olivia explained that Mary had established a comprehensive set of legal arrangements that existed entirely outside the control of my father and completely without his knowledge. The revelation hit me like a physical blow when I realized how she had accomplished this. Over the past 2 years, during her grueling battle with cancer, I had driven Mary to what she claimed were routine insurance appointments. I would wait in the car while she went inside the building. I thought I was simply helping her manage her medical bills. In reality, every single time I drove her to that office, Mary was actually executing a complex legal strategy to build a secure future for me. She had spent her final years, even while her body was failing, ensuring that the daughter who had sacrificed everything to care for her would not be left destitute by a greedy brother. Her quiet and submissive demeanor at the family dinner table had masked a fiercely protective and brilliantly strategic mind. Olivia told me I just needed to wait for the formal will reading, because Mary was about to have the ultimate final word and change my life forever. I spent the next 3 days sitting in the small guest bedroom of my friend, waiting anxiously for the date of the formal will reading to arrive. Olivia had given me strict instructions to simply wait and to absolutely not sign any documents, no matter what my brother threatened or promised. I was trying to distract myself late one evening when my phone suddenly lit up. Seeing the name Brad flashing on the screen made my stomach clench into a tight knot. When I finally answered, his tone was surprisingly friendly, which somehow felt far more dangerous and manipulative than his usual overt arrogance. Brad began the conversation with a highly calculated attempt to ensure his total dominance over the remaining family assets. He actually sounded falsely apologetic at first, casually admitting that he probably could have handled the eviction a little better. He claimed he wanted to make things right and offer an olive branch. Then, he proposed what he described as a perfectly reasonable and legally binding agreement. He told me that if I signed away any and all rights to contest the estate of our parents, he would personally write me a check for a meager $10,000 in cash to help me find a new apartment. I sat there in the dim light, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of his offer. $10,000. To Brad, this highly insulting sum was a perfectly acceptable payoff for a lifetime of me being treated as a second-class citizen in my own home. It was the exact financial value he placed on the 2 grueling years I had spent holding the hand of our dying mother while he entirely neglected her. It was his pathetic way of permanently buying my silence and erasing my existence from the family legacy. When I did not immediately express gratitude for his completely false generosity, his friendly facade instantly vanished. He patronizingly told me to be reasonable, loudly insisting that the will of our father was completely airtight and impossible to challenge. He aggressively threatened that I would not win a single thing in probate court and that I would only drown myself in legal fees. He warned me that if I refused his bribe, I would walk out of the office of the lawyer with less than nothing, and the devastating consequences would be entirely my own fault. The emotional toll of being told my profound sacrifices were worth so little was immense. A younger version of me might have caved to the extreme pressure and the bullying. However, remembering the trembling handwriting in the secret letter of my mother and the firm promises of my attorney, I found a powerful new courage. I firmly rejected his insulting offer, absolutely refusing to be bullied or intimidated any longer. I calmly told Brad that I would not take his money and that I would simply see him at the official will reading. He angrily spat out a final warning, and the line went dead. I set the phone down with shaking hands, setting the perfect stage for a spectacular confrontation that would soon dismantle his entire arrogant world. Exactly 3 days after I rejected his insulting bribe, we all gathered for the official will reading. The atmosphere inside the mahogany conference room of Olivia was incredibly tense. I sat quietly next to my grandmother Betty, clutching my hands together in my lap to stop them from shaking. Brad arrived a few minutes late, exuding absolute confidence. He walked into the room wearing another one of his expensive designer suits, with his wife Angelina trailing right behind him. He did not even look at me. He simply took his seat, adjusted his heavy gold watch, and acted as if he was about to attend a victory parade rather than a solemn legal proceeding. Olivia sat at the head of the table and opened the first heavy folder. She announced that she would begin by reading the last will and testament of my father, Richard. The room went completely silent. As Olivia read through the dense legal text, Brad nodded slowly, a look of deep satisfaction spreading across his face. The will dictated exactly what my brother had been anticipating for years. My father had left 70% of all his personal assets, joint financial accounts, and valuable equipment directly to his son. Brad leaned back in his leather chair, firmly believing that he had just officially secured the entirety of the family wealth. Then, Olivia reached the final section of the document. She announced that I, the daughter who had sacrificed everything, would receive the remaining 30% of the personal assets. After all the debts and final expenses were settled, my portion amounted to a mere $24,000. The reaction from Brad was intensely patronizing. He draped his arm casually over the back of his chair and smiled at me as if he had personally orchestrated a massive favor on my behalf. He smugly referred to my tiny inheritance as a nice little consolation prize. He declared loudly to everyone in the room that the real money and the family house undeniably belonged to him. He actually told me I should be grateful that our father left me anything at all. His arrogant performance was a perfect display of the entitled worldview our father had instilled in him since childhood. He was completely convinced of his own superiority and entirely blind to the spectacular legal storm that Olivia was about to unleash. Brad was still leaning back in his leather chair, basking in his own smug satisfaction, when Olivia calmly cleared her throat. Her voice cut through his arrogant performance like a sharp knife. She looked directly at him and announced that Richard's will represented only a portion of the estate, and that they now needed to read a second, entirely separate will belonging to Mary. Brad immediately frowned, his confident smile faltering for the very first time. He aggressively held up a hand and protested the entire proceeding. He argued loudly that our mother was merely a housewife, and that she owned absolutely nothing independent of our father. He leaned forward and sneered at me across the mahogany table, cruelly stating that whatever little savings account or jewelry collection she might have left me would not change the ultimate truth. He declared that the real money and the family home undeniably belonged to him, and he actually told me to enjoy being homeless. Olivia did not even blink at his outburst. She commanded Brad to sit down with such intense, unwavering authority that he actually obeyed, dropping back into his chair. Then, she opened the second folder and produced stunning legal documentation that would instantly shatter his entire reality. She pulled out a recorded property deed from the county land records. Olivia explained that 5 years prior, our father was facing a massive potential business lawsuit from a highly dissatisfied client. In a desperate attempt to protect his most valuable personal assets from any legal judgments, Richard had executed a formal deed transfer. He moved the ownership of our family home, currently valued at $650,000, entirely into the sole name of our mother, Mary. Brad frantically shook his head, stammering that it must be a mistake and that our father had only done that temporarily. Grandma Betty, who was sitting right next to me, spoke up with a voice full of absolute steel. She revealed that Richard indeed assumed the transfer was just a temporary legal shield. However, Mary deliberately never transferred the property back to him, and Richard, blinded by his own arrogance and deeply patriarchal assumptions, never even bothered to check the paperwork. Because the house had been solely in the name of Mary for the last 5 years, she had the absolute legal authority to leave it to whomever she chose. The room fell completely silent as Olivia revealed the ultimate twist. The very same house that Brad had cruelly evicted me from just days earlier, the house where I had spent 2 agonizing years caring for our dying mother, now legally and entirely belonged to me. Brad sat completely frozen, his face draining of all color, as he realized his foundational assumption of absolute ownership was a massive, humiliating illusion, and the power dynamic he had relied on his entire life had just been completely inverted. The revelation of the house was a massive blow that left Brad completely speechless, but Olivia was not finished. The $650,000 property was only the very beginning of the meticulously crafted financial defense that my mother, Mary, had built for me. As Brad sat there, his face completely drained of color, Olivia opened yet another document from her folder and calmly unveiled the existence of an irrevocable trust. This trust had been established exactly 8 years earlier, listing me, Jennifer, as the absolute sole beneficiary. Brad immediately started sputtering in disbelief. aggressively insisting that our father would never have known about or allowed such a thing. That was when Grandma Betty, sitting quietly beside me, finally spoke up. She looked Brad directly in the eye and stated that 8 years ago, she had given her daughter a private gift of $400,000. It was her own money to give, completely separate from the marital assets of my parents. Mary had astutely taken that gift and invested it conservatively into index funds. Because she had allowed it to grow quietly in the background for nearly a decade, Olivia revealed that the trust had now reached a staggering current value of $1.2 million. Furthermore, because it was an irrevocable trust funded entirely by separate property, it bypassed the probate process entirely. It was completely ironclad, meaning Brad had absolutely no legal standing to contest or claim a single penny of it. Before Brad could even fully process the reality of that massive number, Olivia delivered the next devastating piece of evidence. She revealed that Mary had also maintained a life insurance policy valued at $500,000 for over a decade. She had paid the premiums secretly, and I was explicitly designated as the sole beneficiary. At this point, Brad was practically shaking with rage and desperation, loudly declaring that he was going to contest the entire estate. He desperately claimed that Mary was not of sound mind, arguing that the heavy chemotherapy and the cancer medications must have completely compromised her cognitive abilities and judgment. But my mother was a brilliant strategist who had anticipated his exact reaction. To completely preempt any desperate claims from Brad about her mental state, Olivia produced a formal psychiatric evaluation from a board-certified doctor, proving Mary was fully competent when she signed the documents. If that was not enough, Olivia then referenced a digital drive on the mahogany table. It contained a 32-minute video of my mother, speaking clearly into the camera, flawlessly articulating the exact reasons for every single one of her decisions. She specifically structured these independent legal instruments to protect me from the patriarchal financial abuse I had endured my entire life. In total, Mary had quietly amassed and secured nearly $2.4 million exclusively for me, leaving absolutely nothing to chance and ensuring my absolute freedom. When Olivia summarized the final figures, the room became so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat. She calmly stated that the total value of the assets transferred entirely to me amounted to nearly $2.4 million. The sheer weight of that number hung heavily in the air. I watched the face of my brother as the crushing reality of his situation violently crashed down upon him. He reached out and gripped the edge of the heavy mahogany table. His knuckles turned completely white from the immense pressure. His face lost every drop of color, turning the shade of old paper. He tried to stand up, perhaps to protest or perhaps to leave, but his legs simply gave out. His eyes rolled back into his head and he physically collapsed onto the floor, fainting from pure, unadulterated shock. The assistant of Olivia immediately rushed over to check his pulse, while someone ran to call for medical paramedics. As my brother lay completely unconscious on the carpet of the law office, the ugly truth behind his extreme arrogance was finally exposed to the entire room. Angelina started panicking uncontrollably and worrying about how they were going to survive. Grandma Betty looked down at the unconscious man and coldly revealed the massive secret he had been hiding. She explained that Brad was not the highly successful businessman he constantly pretended to be. He was actually drowning in severe financial debt. Grandma Betty disclosed that he had recently suffered a massive $400,000 investment loss and was currently facing active foreclosure notices on his sprawling Greenwich mansion. Every single aspect of his luxurious lifestyle, from his expensive designer suits to his heavy gold watch and his condescending attitude, was nothing more than a fragile facade. His entire existence was built on massive credit card debt and the incredibly arrogant assumption that he would eventually inherit the wealth of our parents to bail himself out. The inheritance he had so cruelly tried to steal from me was his absolute last lifeline. Without that money, his complete financial and personal ruin was absolutely imminent. In that stunning moment, I finally understood that his immense cruelty toward me was not born out of strength or superiority. His cruelty was born entirely from his own pathetic financial desperation. In the aftermath of that explosive will reading, I had a massive choice to make. I could have used my newfound wealth to exact vengeance on my brother, to drag him through endless legal battles, or to publicly humiliate him exactly the way he had humiliated me. Instead, I chose total liberation. I sat down with a financial advisor and immediately paid off my crushing student loans in one single transaction. With that heavy burden of debt finally lifted from my shoulders, I utilized the trust funds to officially enroll in an advanced nurse practitioner program. It was a professional dream I had delayed for years because my father had always told me I was not worth the educational investment. Now, I was finally investing in myself. As for the $650,000 family home, I was not quite ready to live there again. The painful memories of my cruel eviction were still too fresh in my mind. However, I absolutely refused to sell it. I chose to rent the house out to a young family with 2 little girls, allowing the property to generate a steady income while carefully preserving the beautiful lavender garden my mother had planted. Meanwhile, the arrogant life of Brad completely unraveled. Forced to sell his Greenwich mansion to cover his massive investment debts, his socialite wife Angelina swiftly filed for divorce. My brother, the man who deeply believed he was entitled to the entire world simply because he was born a son, was left to live entirely alone in a cramped and isolated apartment. Looking back on this entire painful journey, I realized that my mother gave me something far more valuable than a massive multi-million-dollar portfolio. Mary gave her daughter the ultimate true freedom. She gave me the absolute financial independence to permanently walk away from toxic people who did not value my presence, and the profound permission to finally believe that I was worthy of a beautifully secure future. I officially cut all ties with the brother who had treated me like a worthless burden, fully embracing a new life defined entirely by my own independent choices. The ultimate lesson my mother secretly taught me is that you absolutely do not have to accept terrible treatment from your family members that you would never accept from a total stranger. Blood does not automatically make someone family, especially if they only bring you pain. You have every right to set firm boundaries and to fiercely protect your peace. Walking away from a toxic environment is never an act of cruelty. It is an act of pure survival. If you are watching this video, and you have ever been told that you are not enough by the exact people who were supposed to love and protect you, please know that they are completely wrong. You are always enough. Sometimes you have to become your own protector. If this story of finding justice and reclaiming true freedom resonated with your own life experiences, please take a moment to hit that like button and officially subscribe to the channel. Tell me down in the comments section about a time you had to stand up for your own worth or walk away from a toxic situation. Thank you so much for listening to my story until the very end, and please remember to always protect your peace.